When I look at JP Morgan's CEO over worker pay ratio, so how much CEO makes compared to the workers, CEO was making 20 times more than an average worker in the company in 1890. In 2010, it became 350 times more than the average worker's salary. And if you look at wage growth from 1980 to 2002 overall in the US economy, workers' salary increased by 75%. The CEO's salary growth, let's say, was around 2,000%. So ridiculous. And in 2010, average CEO pay at an S&P 500 company was $11 million. So they are making tons of money. So the question is, it's fine if they're making money because they are managing billions of dollars of US economy, which affects the global economy as well. So if they deserve it, I'm fine with it. But let's look at one specific case of Henry McKinnell. This is an example I use in my other class, so sorry for the repetition, but I think it's a great example. So McKinnell was hired as CEO by Pfizer in 2001. So here we have how the S&P 500 did compared to Pfizer. And this one S&P 500, this is Pfizer from 2001 to 2006. And from this picture, you can see that the market was not doing very well in the first part, and then the Pfizer market did well in the second third, let's say, of the period. But then the stock market continued to increase, but Pfizer was not doing very well. Why am I comparing Pfizer to the stock market? Because, I mean, if the economy is bad, then you shouldn't blame the CEO, right? Because the company will also perform really poorly because of the economic conditions. So the compensation of this guy was around $26 million at the beginning. Probably because of the economy and everything, it decreased to $20 million. So there was a reduction of $6 million in his salary and annual salary, but he can live with that. The funny thing is, in 2006, he was parted away from Pfizer, but when he left, he got $82 million as a pension. So even if his company performed really poorly and he wasn't a good CEO, when he said goodbye, his total package, the total money he got from the company was $200 million. So the CEO compensation nature is kind of iffy, actually, because they're kind of deciding on what they're doing. A more interesting case happens with the stock options, and this is particularly important for me because an Iowa professor actually wrote a paper about it, and he became very, very famous. He was my professor as well. So what happens is, as I said, there is a fixed portion of the salary of the company, of the CEOs, but they also get options and grants from the company. And if you remember, after the crisis in the US, lots of CEOs said, okay, the economy is not doing well and we are going to give up our salaries. We will only get $1 as our salary. So of course it was a ridiculous statement because they were talking about their fixed salary, which is already like 1/10 of their total compensation. So they just reduced the fixed amount of salary they were getting, but they were able to make tons of money from stock options and stuff like that. In the stock options case, I told you, options are given to the CEOs. This is important. Options are given to because of the case. You will work on it in one of the cases. And in that case, the exercise price is equal to the current stock price. So when this option is granted, the stock price that day is the exercise price. Okay? And after 1 year, they can exercise their option. If the stock price increases, they make a lot of money, right? Which is good. Okay. The problem with this is Erically, this is typical of business, my school. Yermak found some interesting thing about option grants. So he found that stock returns are abnormally high after stock option grants. So what does it mean? They grant the option to the CEO when stock price is low and then stock price started increasing after the option grant. Lee said, okay, there's something iffy with it. He looked at option grant times, and he showed that stock returns are really low before the grant and really high after the grant. So he said, okay, is this a coincidence? Can the CEOs time those dates, grant dates, that perfectly? Because, I mean, the best thing for them is to have the options at the lowest price possible, right? Okay. So he said, okay, this might be backdating. What is backdating? The practice of choosing the grant date of a stock option retroactively so that the date of the grant would coincide with a date when the stock price was lower than its price at the time the grant was actually awarded. So basically, Eric Lee said, okay, there's something iffy with it. Probably those guys are backdating. So they're looking at in the back, and they're choosing the date where the stock price is the lowest. So it was actually not illegal at that time. But when he came up with this paper, it became a huge scandal in the US. He testified in the court. He made the list of Times 100 most influential people. So this was a pretty big deal in the US. Maybe you heard about it, maybe you didn't. And actually, his study is econometrically very simple. So he's not using different models and stuff. He's just taking the average prices. Like we could do it, or we could have found it, but of course we didn't. So basically he said, okay, let's look at all the grants that are awarded. Let me try to find the right one. Okay. Okay. So this is basically when the grant dates were chosen before 2002. Well, I'm going to tell you why 2002 is important. As you can see, grant dates are chosen so where stock prices started decline before the grant date and it started to increase after the grant date. So it cannot be a coincidence, he said. And in a second paper, he showed that it was really not a coincidence. Why? Because in 2002, SEC came up with a new rule, and he said, when you pick the grant date, you have to tell us about that date within 2 days. So in the past, they had more time to tell SEC when the grant date was chosen, so they were flexible about backdating. But after the rule, they had only 2 days to report that date. So you know what happened? This is what happened. So after 2002, this is the grant date, you see. So with this article, he really showed that there was something really iffy going on. It wasn't coincidence, it wasn't luck. CEOs were really backdating their stock options. So even stock options, which is linking the performance to the compensation really well, was open to CEOs' self-interest, let's say. So it's not very easy to come up with good compensation packages. Any questions about this? Did you understand the basic idea? If you want to read more, you can go to his website. It's really interesting, I think. Okay, let me go quickly over a couple of more things. We said firm size is important, and studies show that bigger companies pay more to the CEOs. And it might be because if you're a CEO of a big firm, it means you have more talents, right? Like you had some spark, that's why you're rewarded as being as a CEO of a large firm. And after you become the CEO of a large firm, again, you should be more talented to be able to govern a big company. So firm size is affecting the compensation in a positive way. Another thing is accounting returns are important for compensations. So not only stock price, but accounting returns also, they're linked to the performance of the CEO. They look at return on equity, return on assets, profitability. And if those are good, then the CEO compensation is going to be high, as expected, which also makes sense. Ability is important. So basically, a couple of, I'm not going to go over all of them, but basically, those papers show that if you're more able, if you deserve it, your compensation will be higher. So they're using different proxies for abilities, and they show that more able CEOs are getting more compensation. And incentives within firms might be also different. Divisional managers' compensation packages might be different. So basically, they look at the divisions relative to the other companies' similar divisions in the same industry, for instance. So if you do better compared to a peer firm, then you're getting more compensation, which also makes sense. Another thing is relative performance evaluation. So in order to evaluate a CEO performance, you have to compare it with a benchmark, with the market or with the industry. Some studies show that it's a good thing if you compare it with the industry, and some people say no, because as an industry player, they can affect the industry. Like as a CEO, you can start a price war, which will make the industry worse, and then you will look better. You will increase your compensation. So in that case, you shouldn't link what a CEO can affect as you shouldn't use industry benchmarks, since a CEO can affect the industry. And another thing is benchmarking with the market. It also has some problems. So overall, we don't see that kind of a benchmarking when we determine the CEO compensation. Another thing is managerial ownership. On top of the options, we might also see CEOs having shares, real shares in the company, not options, but shares in the company. So if you increase managerial ownership, do you think it's going to be a good thing or a bad thing? If the CEO owns, let's say, 10% of the company, do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing? Okay, why?
It reduces the conflict of interest.
Okay, what if they own more than, I don't know, 60%? What do you think?
We can motivate the person to sell stuff in the market.
Okay. Simpler terms, simpler.
In that case, CEO is not appointed by shareholders, like, because CEO owns the company.
So it is difficult to fire them if you're not happy with them. So actually, this is generally research says that if the managers own some equity in the company, it's a good thing. But you should keep in mind the problems with it. Of course, yes, if you have more equity, you act like a shareholder, but you have lots of equity, then you might be like a, I don't know, like almost like a dictator. Whatever you say is going to happen. But remember, agency conflicts arise from separation of ownership and management. If you own 70% of the company, you're also the owner and the manager. So it should reduce the agency conflicts as well. So there is some mixed evidence on it in the research as well. Okay. So another thing is if you link the performance of the company to the compensation of the manager, again, that might be problematic. Why? You're giving a lot of things to the CEO, and the CEO is going to do his best to increase to make the firm look as good as possible. And this is exactly what Bergstresser and Philippon showed. They show that if managers have more pay performance sensitivity, they actually manipulate earnings more. So to get more money, they're manipulating earnings. Okay, so that's also another important thing about compensation and firm performance. Here, this slide looks at how incentives affect the investment decision. So basically, here studies show that if managers are insulated from takeover pressure, then they increase wages of the workers. They close the old plants, they open fewer new plants. So it means then they're going to invest more, and they will govern the company, they will manage the company in a better way. So that's one thing. But linking the incentive of the company to the CEO might create problems. I'm going to show you examples in a second, because they might be more interested in extracting value from the firm for their own interest. And I'm going to show you this in a second. The last thing I will talk about is about incentives and acquisitions, because we just covered acquisitions. So people look at how target firm CEOs are affected and how their paces are affected and how acquiring firm CEOs are affected from mergers. Hartzell, Öfek, and Yermak show that CEOs of target firms frequently do quite well as a result of the acquisition. They say they are well compensated as a result of the acquisition, so they get more money. And they receive extra compensation. When they receive extra compensation in a merger, they also get higher acquisition premium. So they are making better investments if they're getting high compensation for the merger, which is good. And Wolf 2004 finds that target CEOs are willing to trade merger premium for greater control rights in the merged company. So which is bad. They're okay with smaller acquisition premium if they can secure a seat in the new company, which is bad for target shareholders because they're not getting as much premium. For the acquiring firm, the results are mixed. So here, Lan and Zhao, for instance, show that acquiring firm CEOs are more likely to be replaced after a poor acquisition, which is good. If they make a bad acquisition, they're going to be turned over. Harvard and Lee look at the acquiring firm CEOs, and they show that they're awarded if the acquisition is not wealth destroying, but they're not penalized if it's a bad acquisition, which is kind of opposite of what the previous one is showing. So overall, we can say that compensation is affecting the merger in a good way for the target CEOs. But for acquiring firms, the results are mixed. Okay, I find this very interesting, and I think you're going to find it interesting. This is the 20, again, talk about the money CEOs make, 20 highest paid CEOs in 1999. If you look at the list, we see Annunziata, Naccio, Kozlowski, and these are the total compensation they're getting in 1999. The funny thing, not funny thing, but the interesting thing, most of those CEOs, either their companies went bankrupt, they had some kind of fraud, like some of them are in prison now, really, and some of them were fired, like the Carleton Fiorina. We talked about HB and Compact merger last time. She was fired after the merger because they said it was a bad merger, value-destroying merger. Let's look at the other ones, and I'm going to tell you which one are on the list. We have Naccio, the second guy in the list. Because of insider trading, he was put in prison, and I think he got like 6 years. So he spent 6 years in prison because of insider trading. Then we have Kozlowski. That is really interesting. That he was the third guy in the list, the CEO of Tyco. So he was accused of misuse of corporate funds. Okay, let's read this part because it's interesting. So it says his 30 million New York City apartment was allegedly paid for by the company. Even the shower curtains they cost $6,000, shower curtains. Also, more interesting thing, he gave a birthday party for his wife, I think for his second wife. Yeah, they were in a relationship and they both got married with different people, and then they got divorced, they got married later. And he threw a birthday party for $2 million for this lady, using the company money. An interesting thing is, oh yes, it took place on an Italian island and featured an ice sculpture of the city of David urinating, blah, blah, blah. It was vodka. Ridiculous. And like, it was paid by the company. Okay? So he spent some time in, I don't know how much time, but he spent some time in prison as well. Then we have Ebers, which was also in the list. This guy also, okay, conspiracy, securities fraud, and making false regulatory filings. He was the CEO of WorldCom. What happened is, okay, was it here? Yes. The company WorldCom he was working for, they lent $400 million to the CEO, and the company couldn't get the money back, and WorldCom went bankrupt after that. I mean, it wasn't just related to that 400 million probably, but you see, I mean, he also spent a lot of time in prison. Okay, Enron, this was also on the list. Enron scandal, you both know, Kenneth Lay and Jeffrey Skilling. They both got 24-year sentence. One was lucky. He died from heart disease like 2 months after he was filed as guilty. Okay, rest in peace. But the other one was, I think his prison sentence is 45 years. So a lot of time. Then we have the ones not on the list, but it is because the list was for 1999. The others are like new CEOs. We have Madoff. We know Madoff. Okay, so he's also, yeah, his charge was like up to 150 years in prison. I don't know what he's doing. We have John Riggars of Adelphia. He was in wire and securities fraud. And he's in prison, and he's going to be out in 2017. This is also an interesting one, is the James McDermott, the CEO of Keefe, Bruyette & Woods. Basically, his girlfriend, he said some stuff about inside information to his girlfriend, and they made tons of money insider trading. I think he spent only 6 months in prison, though, not that much. Okay, so that's another thing. And we have Vexel. This is bank fraud of Imclone. Again, he got 5 months in prison. So these are the biggest corporate scandals of the century, basically. This is an interesting case. He was found guilty, and then he faked his own death. But then they figured that out through his girlfriend and things like that. So, okay, interesting people, interesting lives, okay? So these are all the problems we might see. But important thing, why did I talk about all those things? I showed you that list where compensation was really high for those people. It's not a coincidence that those people are also convicted. Why? They care about their own interests that much. They care about money so much. So it wasn't very surprising to see all those tragic events, let's say, in their lives. Okay, I think I'm done with the compensation part. From here, I will quickly talk about other mechanisms of governance and how shareholders can protect themselves and things like that. One is we know that as the owners of the company, shareholders have some say on the company actions, and any shareholders can submit a resolution that is put to a vote at the annual meeting. So if you're not happy with something, put a resolution in it. And there might be private negotiations, like in the California Public Employees Retirement System, they privately negotiated with the firm, which can happen. But you can also see it in a public case. Interesting cases with Walt Disney Company and Michael Eisner, I think it's how it's called. Actually, in their meeting in 2004, 43% of the shareholders voted against him being the chairperson. Of course, the company wanted to keep him, and they separated the chairman from the CEO duties, let's say. I think he stayed as the CEO first, and then I think he left the company. So like, I'm always saying that, yeah, as shareholders, we don't have much say, but we see in that case, yes, voting is important. Another thing is, as shareholders, we have to approve, we have a say on major corporation events, like for the merger, they need your vote. So if you're not happy with something, you don't have to agree with it. That's a mechanism for corporate governance. We talk about proxy contest. If a potential acquirer, let's say, wants to have a say, wants to take over a company, they can start with the proxy contest, where they're using the proxy votes of the shareholders to replace the board of directors in the target company. So we might see proxy contest. And whenever there's an announcement of a contest, actually stock prices increase by 8%, which means proxy contests are seen as good events by the shareholders, even if it's not finalized. Okay, so that's another way. If you look at the outcomes of the proxy contest, most of the case, of course, the manager wins. But still, there are lots of cases where dissidents also might also win. But it is a mechanism of governance. Okay. Another thing is with controlling shareholders. We talked about dual class companies before. Sometimes if a company has more than one type of stock, sometimes it can give some shareholders more rights. They have more voting rights, but less rights on the cash flow. Gompers, Ishii, and Metric find strong evidence that firm value is increasing in cash flow rights and decreasing in voting rights. So if it is better for the company overall if the voting rights are less, let's say, for the dual class stockholders. Okay. Then I have the slide about management entrenchment. This is also important. So here they're trying to find how strong a CEO is. And to measure this in academia, what we do is actually we look at anti-takeover devices. Question: if there are lots of anti-takeover devices, is this company well governed or poorly governed? Poorly governed. We call those companies as dictator companies, actually. If there are lots of anti-takeover devices. Why? We talk about a takeover is a way of getting rid of poor management. If a CEO is putting lots of anti-takeover device, it means he's acting like a dictator. So GIM index, it was found by Gompers, Ishii, and Metric, is used a lot. And in that index, we have 24 different characteristics that can entrench managers. Most of them are related to takeover devices. And studies, okay, the evidence is still mixed, but most of the studies says that democracy firms are better, their values are higher than the dictator firms. So good governance is good. Okay. What kind of anti-takeover devices you can remember? Can you remember any? What do we have?
European Commission.
We have regulations, but before going into the regulations, what kind of anti-takeover divisions we can? Okay, yes, but before that, poison pills is one thing. What else? Golden parachutes is, yes. There was more stuff.
Another type of board.
Staggered boards, exactly. We have those here actually. Yeah, in the staggered boards, if you remember, only 1/3 of the boards are up election every election period. Why? Because they don't want another company, acquired company, use proxy contest and put their own guys in the board. So for an acquired company to be successful, they need to wait for 2 election periods so that they can win the board. Yes, these are all anti-takeover devices. Perfect. In the regulations, if you look at the regulation side, actually that SOX 2002 was really important. They put that regulation to increase the accuracy of information given to the shareholders. So they wanted the auditing process to be more independent. This all came after Enron scandal and stuff, of course. So they want the auditing process to be more transparent. They want more, they put more, what's the word? They punished more when a company is giving false information to the public. And they force companies to have better internal auditing mechanisms, basically. And they wanted the companies to have audit committees where there's a financial expert in. And they want the timely reporting of insider trading. I'm going to talk about insider trading, which is interesting. So insider trading is fine as long as it is reported on time. Okay, so CEOs can use their own information to buy and sell their securities of the same company, as long as they report it timely. And what else? They put some regulations, like they restricted employment of the auditing people, finding jobs in the companies they audited within 1 year, so that they're not going to have any kind of weird relationship, let's say. So these are all important things that SOX 2002 brought. After that, for instance, GE took a very important step, and they put 11 independent directors in their board of 17. So they have this explanation. They said, oh, it's important for us to be independent. We are active, informed, and independent. So we are using all those independent directors, so that we are gonna. They were just trying to signal that they have a good governance system. Okay. Something related to SOX 2002 is in the Cadbury Commission. They basically have a committee, and they developed a code of codes of corporate governance, let's say. So they said audit and compensation committees should be made up entirely of independent directors. CEOs shouldn't be the chairman of the board. So what do you think the difference between SOX and Cadbury? Okay, it was a tough question. SOX, it's a regulation, really, and you're going to be punished if you don't obey. Cadbury Commission is just like a advisory committee. They just advise companies what to do. So there's no punishment if you don't follow what they say. I'm going to spend the last 10 minutes or so, 10, 15 minutes in insider trading actions, and maybe we're going to have time to finish everything as well. So this definition I took from the SEC site, and I will just read it. First of all, as I said before, insider trading is not always illegal. It can be legal or illegal. But the legal version is when corporate insiders, officers, directors, and employees buy and sell stock in their own companies. When corporate insiders trade in their own companies, they must report their trades to the SEC. And this is publicly available information, actually. It's fine if they do it. It's not illegal if they report it. So if they have information about a merger announcement, earnings release, change in payout policy, we talk about all those things, and we talk about how it's going to affect the stock price. So those people have privileged information. They know when the merger announcement will come. So they know when the stock price will decrease or increase, depending on whether they're targets or acquires, let's say. So if they do illegal insider trading, they go to the, they generally have prison time, or they have to pay fines. And also, it's also illegal to tip information. So not just what they're doing, also if they tell their family members what to do, it's also insider trading. And, okay. So here, information becomes available to the investors, and there will be some adjustment period, some time that passes before it becomes public. And here, informed trading begins by public when they know the information. Here, if they trade during this adjustment period, then it might be a problem, okay? So they have to be very careful about when they're doing their trading. So they have to give the information to public as soon as possible, which is good for increasing market efficiency, of course. So to make the market strong form efficient, this is what you need, because you need all kinds of information to be reflected in prices. Okay. So I'm not going to go into the law related to that, related to insider trading in US, but I will go over the Martha Stewart example because it is more, let's say, magazine-like thing. You all know Martha Stewart, right? The funny thing, do you think Martha Stewart went to the prison because of insider trading? Actually, no. She went to the prison for lying to the authorities. It wasn't because of the insider trading. Because this is ridiculous, this example. So let me just read it very quickly. On 2001, the young assistant to her Merrill Lynch broker told her on his orders that she should sell all her 4,000 shares in Imclone Systems. We went over Imclone Systems. It was, the CEO was what, Warlock or something. He was also, he went to prison as well. Okay, now Sam Wexel. Yeah, we talk about Sam Wexel. Okay, so she said that she should sell her shares because the company was about to implode because they couldn't get the approval of a drug. So, of course, if they cannot get the approval for the drug, their stock prices will go down. Okay, so she jumped at the opportunity. Interesting thing is she just avoided a loss of $45,000, which is not so much for Martha Stewart probably. But she couldn't resist the chance to dab at the blood on her investment record. She said, isn't it nice to have brokers who tell you these things? She reportedly said. Stewart went so far as to delete a computer log of a phone message in which the broker told her he thought Imclone was going to start trading downward according to the indictment. So she knew she was doing, she had some privileged information, and she tried to get rid of all the information. She allegedly, she lied to investigators and stated that she had ordered a stop loss on her stock at $60. So she said, I already had this, let's say, what's the word, authorization before she knew about this information. But she went to the prison, 5 months in prison, 2 years probation, but then she became a celebrity. Like, she has lots of shows and stuff, so probably this affected her in a good way, right? It was just publicity. Okay, so this is kind of insider trading. We talk about takeover defenses. Let me just go over this. And okay, so we talk about the relationship between CEOs and shareholders and kind of between CEOs and debt holders. But also we have other monitoring mechanisms in the company. So we have security analysts, for instance. They closely follow companies. So it just increases monitoring, and it is actually a corporate governance mechanism. When more people are watching you, you have to be more careful about what you're doing. Employees of the firm are also very likely to detect whatever is going on. So they're also monitoring the CEO. SEC protects the investing public against fraud and stock price manipulation. So we talk about it. SEC and regulators are following all companies as well. Lenders are really carefully monitoring the companies. Why? Because they want to get their money back. And also, you probably wouldn't think about it. It doesn't come to my mind very, very quickly. But if you are in a competitive market, it's a natural corporate governance mechanism. If it's very competitive, you have to be really good to have a say in the market. So even the market structure actually affects how the corporate governance will be in your company. So these are all important for corporate governance. We focus on US a lot, but if we look at the world, depending on the country and the legal regime, shareholder rights are different. Let's say in US, shareholder rights are really important, for instance. But in some other countries, like in Turkey, we might not have good shareholder rights. So you cannot protect your right as shareholders if something iffy is going on in the company. In Europe, what we see lots of pyramids, and we see lots of family-run businesses. Those family-run businesses, actually, they have, we talk about it in the US case as well. So they have controlling shareholders. They own at least 20% of the company. They're the managers and owners of the company in that case. So that might be a conflicting case between controlling shareholders and minority shareholders. Okay, even within the shareholders, there might be a conflict of interest. Like think about dual class shares. It's the same thing. Who is gonna benefit from an action? So this might be a problem in Europe case, let's say. So In those cases, controlling family elects the management, so they don't have much problem in between, but the conflicts might arise between controlling shareholders and minority shareholders. Another thing is the pyramid structure. We see this. This happens when there is a company. It owns 50%. Okay, what was it? Let me remember, because I'm confused with pyramid and tunneling. Okay, in the pyramid case, a company owns a controlling interest in another company. So basically, it is controlling two companies at the same time, which might be a problem. Which company's cash will be used for which company might create a problem between shareholders and the management. That might be a problem. And also, like in Germany, there might be a different model, like stakeholder model. Like in US, shareholders have lots of rights, but for instance, in Germany, employees have lots of representation rights. So other stakeholders have more say in the governance of the company, which might also be important. Okay, last two slides. And in some companies, we might see cross-holdings. That's interesting, actually. You probably heard about it. In Japan, there's keiretsu. So there are groups of firms, conglomerates, let's say. They have a relation with the bank also. So it's almost like a club of companies, let's say. So not individual corporations, but a couple of corporations get together. And a similar thing in Korea is called chaebol. I think this is how you read it. So basically, this has conglomerate groups in widely diversified industries, like Hyundai and Samsung and LG. They're all chaebols, and they have great say on politicians as well, because they're running lots of money in the company. Okay, so overall, when we talk about corporate governance, we talk about conflicts of interest that might arise between different stakeholders in the company. So because of those agency conflicts, we might have good governance mechanisms. The problem with that is if you have a very tight governance mechanism, then you're not leaving any room for the CEO to function well. So you have to be very careful about how tight your governance mechanism is. And as I said before, we are still trying to figure out whether having good governance is increasing firm value or not. There are lots of econometric issues we're dealing with, data kind issues we're dealing with. But overall, if you believe that the CEO is working on behalf of you, you're going to feel happy and you're going to think that he's going to take good investments. Any questions about anything we covered today? No? Then we're done. Thank you so much. But they also get options and grants from the company. And if you remember, after the crisis in the US, lots of CEOs said, okay, the economy is not doing well and we are going to give up our salaries. We will only get $1 as our salary. So of course it was a ridiculous statement because they were talking about their fixed salary, which is already like 1/10 of their total compensation. So they just reduced the fixed amount of salary they were getting, but they were able to make tons of money from stock options and stuff like that. In the stock options case, I told you, options are given to the CEOs. This is important. Options are given because of the case. You will work on it in one of the cases. And in that case, the exercise price is equal to the current salary, but he can live with that. The funny thing is, in 2006, he was parted away from Pfizer, but when he left, he got $82 million as a pension. So even if his company performed really poorly and he wasn't a good CEO, when he said goodbye, his total package, the total money he got from the company was $200 million. So the CEO compensation nature is kind of iffy, actually, because they're kind of deciding on what they're doing. A more interesting case happens with the stock options, and this is particularly important for me because an Iowa professor actually wrote a paper about it, and he became very, very famous. He was my professor as well. So what happens is, as I said, there is a fixed portion of the salary of the company, of the CEOs. By 75%, the CEO's salary growth, let's say, was around 2,000%. So ridiculous. And in 2010, average CEO pay at an S&P 500 company was $11 million. So they are making tons of money. So the question is, it's fine if they're making money because they are managing billions of dollars of US economy, which affects the global economy as well. So if they deserve it, I'm fine with it. But let's look at one specific case of Henry McKinnell. This is an example I use in my other class, so sorry for the repetition, but I think it's a great example. So McKinnell was hired as CEO by Pfizer in 2001. So here we have how the S&P 500 did compared to Pfizer, and this one is. When I look at JP Morgan's CEO over worker pay ratio, so how much CEO makes compared to the workers, CEO was making 20 times more than an average worker in the company in 1890. In 2010, it became 350 times more than the average worker's salary. And if you look at wage growth from 1980 to 2002 overall in the US economy, workers' salary increased S&P 500. This is Pfizer from 2001 to 2006. And from this picture, you can see that the market was not doing very well in the first part, and then the Pfizer market did well in the second third, let's say, of the period. But then the stock market continued to increase, but Pfizer was not doing very well. Why am I comparing Pfizer to the stock market? Because, I mean, if the economy is bad, then you shouldn't blame the CEO, right? Because the company will also perform really poorly because of the economic conditions. So the compensation of this guy was around $26 million at the beginning. Probably because of the economy and everything, it decreased to $20 million. So there was a reduction of $6 million in his salary and annual salary.